Hello and welcome to Debate IQ. This is the second panel debate brought to you by the IQ team. I'm Viswa, Sadasivan. IQ stands for Inconvenient Questions. We are Singapore's newest socio-political website. Debate IQ is a fortnightly panel discussion of a question that you raised. Today's topic, or inconvenient question, is transport fare hikes. Are they necessary now? The Public Transport Council, or PTC, announced late last month that bus and train fares would go up by 2.8 cents starting this April. Now, for regular adult commuters, this means an increase of between 2 and 5 cents per trip. Now, student concessionary fares will go up by 1 cent. Now, this resulted in a big outcry from the public and especially on social media, despite the fact that Transport Minister Lui Tak-Yu gave the assurance in Parliament that 1.1 million commuters will not see any changes in their fares, as well as senior citizens' fares will remain the same, and that we could see a fare reduction later this year because of the drop in oil price that started in 2014 last year. So what seems to be the concern here? It's certainly not just about the fare hike per se or the quantum of the fare hike. From the discussions, especially online, that we have seen so far, a few key issues seem to be bothering Singapore residents. Number one, why now, when oil prices have dropped by more than 50%? Second, shouldn't the PTC adjustment formula and process be less rigid and more responsive to the shifts and realities on the ground? Third, why should commuters pay more when the public transport operators or PTOs are making profits? Well, this has been the claim by some people, which may seem pretty significant. Well, people don't see the PTOs delivering good enough service as well, now, especially with the frequent train breakdowns and delays. To address these and other questions, I had invited the Minister for Transport to join us today. He declined. Even though we won't have the benefit of having the government's point of view, we have decided to proceed with this topic because it's clearly an important issue to you. I have with me here on the panel three individuals who are highly qualified to comment on the issues. Michael Heng, CEO of Energycorp Global Private Limited. He's also chairman of the Sustainability Mobility Committee of the Sustainable Energy Association of Singapore. A mouthful, Michael. A well-known commentator as well on transport issues and corporate social responsibility, right?
Yes.
Assistant Professor Walter Edgar Theseira, an economics lecturer from the NTU and who is an expert commentator on transportation. And last but certainly not least, this handsome-looking dude, Farhan Shah, editor of drwealth.com. He has written informed commentaries, in my view, exploring the relationship between oil prices and public transport fares. Welcome, gentlemen. Before we actually get down to discussing the topic, let's take a look at what the man on the street has to say about the fare hike.
You cannot have good service and low fare. So if you want to have good service, you must be willing to pay for much more for the fare. Now, how much? That is up to people, that is politically accepted by people, right?
I find it's not really justifiable in a sense, even though it's 4 to 6 cents, but I think it's quite a big jump for even short distance like shuttle bus within just the estate.
I think the government has their reasons to increase the prices, like it may be due to an improvement in terms of the timing and the services. So I think us as Singaporeans, we perhaps should give them the support that they need.
Actually, I think it's a little bit steep because if you understand how public transport, the whole term of public, right? In other countries, public transport don't actually make money, but then our country's public transport, year after year, they report, they report profits every quarter. So I mean, I don't understand how come it's making so much money and yet they still have to increase the fare.
Technically, with the amount of train falls and the breakdowns and all, I don't think it's justified at all.
Working adults like us, maybe it's a bit hard for us because we are not only travelling to one place every day to work, but also we are travelling throughout the whole Singapore sometimes.
The recent price hike might be a little bit too soon based on the most recent price hike that we have. So probably it will affect most of the middle income earners.
most of the higher incomes, they have their own transport, you see. But for the lower incomes, they have to depend on these MRTs instead. So that's where the increase of the price maybe is a bit too harsh on them.
This should be absorbed by the company themselves and not put the cost onto the consumer.
Right. Gentlemen, maybe I could start with you, Walter. As an economist and a transport expert, you could probably give us a broad understanding of why there's a need for that, for there to be a formula as such. The formula that we have right now was actually as a result of the Fair Review Mechanism Committee that was convened and it came up with a report in 2013. And the fair adjustment formula was amended as follows. So 40% of the equation of the formula is based on the CPI, Consumer Price Index. Another 40% is weighted on the wage increase. And there's a 20% component that's allocated to the energy index.
Right.
Right? So this is the change, because I believe that before this this recommendation, there was no energy index component.
No, before this it was 50% inflation, but it was a different definition of inflation that would have included some aspects of energy. Then the other 50% in the past was basically the wage portion, the wage index portion.
And there's also a productivity factor,
that's right?
Yes. Could you explain that?
Sure.
So could you give us a broad understanding,
So
in
maybe
layman's terms?
maybe I can walk through each of the aspects, right? So I mean, the basic idea behind a fair formula is that you want to capture as far as possible the different aspects that make up the operating cost of a public transport system. So on the one hand, you have wages, right, which is basically what you're paying to the drivers, to the operators, everybody involved in the public transport company. So of course, every year, wages tend to go up. We don't want to say that, just because you're a bus driver, you don't deserve to have your wages go up at least the same rate as other people in the economy. So we want to have a component which reflects the wage increases of people in the economy as a whole. Now, if you're talking about the inflation component, that reflects the fact that the public transport operator has to purchase goods and services just like all of us do. So again, you have to have some component that reflects the general price increase. Finally, the energy component, right? The 2013 review put in an energy component, but it modified the inflation part. It took out parts of the inflation index, which partially represent energy costs. So in particular, removed the cost of private transport from the inflation calculation. Now in Singapore,
why is this formula necessary?
Why is the formula necessary in general?
Other jurisdictions have formulas?
Okay, so the advantage of a formula is that it gives you a very transparent view into how prices are determined for public transport. Now, by contrast, if you look at many other jurisdictions, there may be a formula in the heads of the decision makers, the politicians who are deciding how much to charge for public transport. But although they have a formula in their heads, it's not out there for public view or consumption. As a result, we couldn't even be sitting here, having this debate about what the right formula is, because we don't know what it would be.
Unless you can get into the heads.
Unless you can get into the heads, exactly.
Now, what's the practice in big cities? Established cities, global cities like New York, for example.
Sure. So in a lot of cities, you have a board of commissioners, or you have overseers of the public transport system. Their job basically is to decide on fare hikes and things of this nature. And in a lot of places, these commissioners are basically political appointees. Whoever is running the administration of the day gets to pack the board with their own supporters, or basically whoever they think is right for the job. Now, as a result of this, fare increases in many cities throughout the world can be a little ad hoc. So I'll give you one example. From 1995 to 2003 in New York City, the single ride fare for the public transit system stood at $150. So of course, after 8 years, something had to give and it changed. Now, guess how much it changed to? It went from $150 to $2 overnight. That's a 33% increase. But that is not uncommon in cities where you have a fair regulation process which is driven largely by politics. Because obviously nobody wants to raise fares, it's going to lose you votes. You would like to put it off for as far as possible. But when you finally have to make the decision, it's not surprising that it can rise by 10, 20, 30% in one shot, you see.
On the other hand, the Singapore model is to actually fix the review time every year.
Yes.
Now, wouldn't that somehow set in a certain rigidity? In other words, whether or not there is a need for a review, there is a time for a review, end of the year. Now, when there is a review, somehow it gets reviewed.
I mean, that's what happens in Singapore. But I want to point out, though, something to add on to your initial question about the productivity component.
Yeah.
And that's something that's important to point out. So the productivity component is basically a deduction that's taken off the allowable fare increase. And this deduction is set currently at minus 0.5 percentage points per year. What does it mean? It means that basically, if everything else were to stand still, if inflation stands still, if wages don't change, if energy prices don't change, public transport operators have to give back 0.5% of their fares every year. And basically,
based on the gains they've made on
based on the gains they made in productivity, based on the idea that as they do this for longer and longer, they ought to get a bit more efficient at doing it. Now, what that means is that if we have a regular process, if it's possible for other things to stand still and for operators to improve, we actually should see a regular reduction in fares. Of course, we don't see that in reality because everything else
in reality,
goes up.
and this is a question for you, Farhan. You've written quite extensively on this subject and done some interesting studies, right? Now, am I correct to say that in the years 2008 and 2009 is when we actually saw a reduction?
That's correct.
Right. And so apart from that, in all the other, on most or if not all the other years, it's been either stagnant, or there has been an increase.
It has been increased, yes.
So generally, there has been an increase. Whenever there was a review, there has been an increase, right? So a review generally leads to an increase in the Singapore context. So if that is true, does it make sense for us in the Singapore system to have a fixed time every year to have a review? Is it not possible to have a review as and when there's a need for a review?
Well, then that brings up the question of when you should have the review. And
who calls for it?
Yeah, exactly. Who calls for it? Who decides who wants to have the review? And I think the system we have now, it might not be perfect, the fair review, but at least you know that it's going to come at the end of the year, and they're going to convene and they're going to announce a fair review system, and everyone can expect it. Whether it can be changed based on economic conditions, like you mentioned earlier on in 2008 and 2009, when we had the height of the global financial crisis, SMRT and SBS decided to reduce fares. So yeah, I mean, that's a good point. Like whether we should think about changing the time of the review, perhaps when we have the prices of the oil, since this fare formula now has an energy index, and then when we have prices of the electricity, diesel and oil for the previous year, then we have the review.
But let me ask you, doesn't the need or the requirement to have a review every year also put in a certain rigidity in the mindsets
of whose mindsets?
Of whoever is making the decision?
Right. Whoever is making the decision? Yeah. You mean like the public
In other words,
transport?
the moment you have a formula that is applied every time there's a review, does it bring in a certain rigidity? For example, right? This is a comment by this individual called Ng EJ, and he wrote online and made this. Policy decisions must be made on updated data whenever possible. The fare increase that was held back in 2014 should not have been carried forward over in 2015 because the price of oil has fallen drastically. It is senseless to implement the full increase originally meant for 2014 in the light of the new developments. Even if fare review exercises are primarily conducted using past data rather than forecast data, it is illogical to ignore the latest statistics because the current year's profit experienced by the transport companies would be a function of the current price levels and not previous price levels. Comment.
The thing is, the 2014 price revision, I mean for 2015, already took into account, so actually there was a decrease, but because we rolled over 2013, it was initially supposed to be 6.6%, if I'm not mistaken. Right. So they only took half of it or so, and then the other half they decided, okay, next fare formula, next fare review, we're going to implement that. It's illogical not to, you've decided to roll over the fare, and then you decide, hey, wait a minute, economic conditions have changed, or oil prices have changed. Maybe we shouldn't put this in, but it's already was supposed to be in already. Do you know where I'm coming from?
But private companies have to decide that way. See, private companies cannot decide something on past cost. It has to decide forward, right? On say what's the cost going to be.
Yep.
There are a few reasons why private companies make a decision on how to raise prices. Why they should raise prices? Am I covering my cost? Am I losing profit? That's very important. Second, what are my cost drivers? What are my cost drivers? And it's a cost driver that drives and say, hey, I think it's time to make to increase my price. And then, of course, shareholders' expectation of the profit. Now, in this case, right, yes, the circumstances of 2013, right, went to the fare increase of 2014, right, because we thought that it will keep going up, but it didn't. And therefore, it's really a windfall.
So what you're saying is that the assumptions have shifted drastically in 2014 compared to 2013. And when the assumptions have shifted, shouldn't also the way you look at the formula shift, even though there was a carry forward plan?
Yes.
I mean, but hang on a moment, right? If you have a carry forward and you had a total allowable increase and you slash that in half, then you're essentially telling the companies that you have to put up with less than the allowable increase for an entire year. So now all of a sudden we're blaming them for actually giving up this half.
That's the risk of doing business as a private company. Right? We cannot say that.
But these are also
they give you half the increase.
Yeah,
and
these are private
now
companies. That's
them
why I'm against it.
No, but these are also private companies with certain public service obligations.
Right. Yes.
So that would constrain their operating abilities.
When circumstances change drastically in favor of the commuters must gain the benefit of that change. That's important because you are basically what? You are stewards of public assets. Right? If you look at it carefully, do we charge for the use of the road? Do we charge for bus stop erection? Do we charge? So SMRT, for example, everything that SMRT has belongs to our forefathers. We put it there. Social investments and so on. 51% owned by Temasek. Temasek makes its money from reserves, returns from reserves. So it's still money. Delgro is privileged. Right? Monopoly license to run the shoulder. Where at the end of the day, right? Can we see the social responsibility, right? The social consciousness that is reflected in constraint. Now, we have very good social enterprises, fair price. There's nothing to stop fair price from saying every month, 5 cents increase. We hardly even notice it.
But that's fair price is a cooperative, which is a slightly different setup.
This is where we need to change our perception of public transport. What is public transport? Is it a private good? No. Is it a public good? No. It is a quasi-private, quasi-public, semi-public. Whatever it is, you will agree with me that it is not totally private. I cannot choose. McDonald's increased Big Mac by $1, I can choose not to have it. Right? But SMRT hits out by 5 cents, 10 cents, 50 cents.
Maybe
therein
lies the dilemma. We have a hybrid.
Yes.
We have a confused situation. And maybe the problem really is about expectations. You see, here we have a system where the public has private sector expectations of these private companies, which are technically private companies, which also are constrained by public service obligations.
Yes.
The government expects those public service obligations to be rendered. The stakeholders and the shareholders expect them to deliver shareholder value.
Correct.
Right? And the commuters want everything to run smoothly.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So it is probably perhaps the problem is with the setup.
Yes, no, I completely agree with that. And the reason why I agree is that these are regulated monopolies. And any time you have private companies in an environment where they're regulated, right, to be honest, the responsibility is actually on the government or the regulator to set the terms and conditions appropriately so that they deliver value to to the public, right? But I disagree with the idea that the private companies should be socially responsible just because they are regulated monopolies. So if you have a problem with the companies, to some extent, it reflects an issue with the contracting or the model that they're under rather than with the incentives of the company itself. In other words, I want to say basically let companies be companies, let them do what they need to do to earn profits, but if you want to make them more responsible, you have to actually construct a contract or a system whereby they're forced to be responsible.
But the contract is already implied by giving you the social license to operate as monopolies. Monopolies, by definition, are inefficient enterprises.
No, in the case of public transport, monopolists are efficient actually because of the economy of scale. But anyway.
But they keep saying that I'm losing money. I'm doing this. I'm not delivering. I've delayed. I'm overcrowding. Overcrowding due to what? Not because suddenly the population shoot up, but because the failure of strategic planning. Now, that came out in the investigation report 2 years ago.
But they're losing money because they lose money on their operating system, right? Okay, they
Yes.
lose money on train and bus operations. They make up money basically on other services related to that. But that's cross-subsidization.
No, but in SMRT, which is actually all they have is social assets. Whatever they make from advertisement, from real estate rentals, all must go into.
Right, but
Into
this is
the profit.
this is cross-subsidization.
Yes,
this is basically
but
the
that's
idea
what
that
company does, right? Loss leaders, you look
Right.
again at fair price, right? As from a social enterprise perspective. Some item lose money, some they make money.
Okay, so,
See?
so to understand your point, Michael, what you're saying is, regardless of whether they're making, the two private operators are making more money from transport or from other sources of income,
Yes.
they should look at the total profits they're making,
As
right? And then use that to plow back into
As
the
long as they
Is
use
that what you're
social
saying?
assets to make the profit, I'm okay if you exclude international revenue from if their growth. 2/3 of their growth revenue comes from overseas. You can exclude that, provided you bring it back, those things that you use local assets to make. Then you look at the 1/3 revenue that they make with local. Well, how much of those assets are social assets?
Okay.
And if you
I-
make it with social assets, it has to be
I see your
shared.
point. Farhan,
Say again.
what's your view?
Well-
You're hearing two versions, right?
Yeah.
And what's interesting is, one appears to be the point of view of an educated, informed person who looks at it from a technical, economic point of view. And there's a logic in that. Michael is looking at it from a layman's perspective about what he sees as what is fair and unfair. It may not and need not fit the organizational or economic model per se, but it does have its own logic.
I think both of them bring up very good points. And the main point is that we chose SMRT and SBS to be privatized. And you create this tension or dilemma between your shareholders and the commuters that you're serving. Obviously, the shareholders want more profits. They will want you to increase your fares because then they get higher dividends. Whereas the commuters or the customers, since they're calling us that now, customers, we want affordable fares. So that is the role of the Public Transport Council to strike that balance. Whether they are striking that balance or not, it's hard to strike a balance. But whether they're striking or not, it's up in the air.
Now,
So
when
for
we
debate.
look at the Public Transport Act, it gives only 3 reasons to increase public transport fare. 1, the economic viability of the operators. 2, the interests of the public. 3, which is not relevant here, and whether it affects the integration between bus and trains and all that. So the third point is not relevant. So there are only 2 points to say that, should we increase this year? Then we have to ask ourselves, hey, PTC had to ask, how is the economic viability affected? Last year when we did a review, I say, look, profit dropped 40%.
Yep.
Okay, January 2014. Wow, oil prices shot up. Yeah, okay, so 6.6%, we do 3.8 first. Great. Okay. 2, is a public interest safeguarded in this case? Now I hear it doesn't affect millions of people, right? For students, it's free. And now, $7.5 million have to be given out. Subsidy, right? In terms of transport voucher. How is affordability balanced with subsidy?
Subsidies are a separate issue. Basically, okay, the basic point is somebody has to pay for public transport, right?
Yes.
Whether it's the taxpayer, whether it's all commuters, whether it's some of them.
Yes.
The idea of a subsidy is that you want to help the people who need the help the most,
Yep.
right?
Therefore, it's not
right.
affordable. You see, you have a 2.8% only. But is it affordable? Affordable means it's okay. It doesn't hurt. But then you say, no. I have to give 7.5 million out.
But there are always going to be some
Right.
people for whom it's not affordable.
All right. Let's
Right.
take a step back from this discussion, because I don't think we can agree. Right? And that's not the point. That's not the point.
Yeah.
Right.
Let's just take a step back and ask ourselves, what's causing all these problems? Right? If you look at it from the government's point of view, the government is not being irresponsible. The government is trying to appease all the key stakeholders. Nobody benefits if those who are delivering the transport services collapse. So they are trying to make sure that transport services are buoyant enough to be able to continue to provide quality service. And they are putting conditionalities to ensure that. That's number one, right? Number two, and so as a result, you want to increase their income a little bit more to subsidize their costs. Number two, for the commuters, the minister has announced that 1.1 million people are not going to be affected by this fare hike. It's not a number to be scoffed at,
Yes.
right? It's a significant number, right? Now, then you've got other schemes like the public transport fund and so on, where money is being pooled, collected, and contributed by the PTOs,
Right.
if I'm not mistaken,
Yes,
right?
that's right, yeah.
The public transport operators are required by law to contribute to this fund called the Public Transport Fund.
It's a combination of voluntary and involuntary.
Yes,
yeah.
yeah, it's a combination
Yeah.
of that. But they are required and they do put in the money. And that fund is what is being used to subsidize, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
So it is actually, there's a certain logic in it,
There is.
right?
The fact that they can contribute about 15 million into the fund together,
Okay,
right?
I understand.
Means
Let-
that they are viable, you know?
I understand. We can talk about viability, and I think we've heard the different versions of it. The question is, what's the buzz? What's causing this? Is it just about the price hike? Is it just about this? Or is there something deeper that is simmering that is making people unhappy? I think that's what it is, if you ask me. Farhan, what's your view?
Well, you can tell from the internet, on social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, there are so many unhappy people out there. What's making them unhappy? There's a variety of factors. CPF is one very big problem. Housing, for that matter, is another. Public transport. Singapore is going through a very difficult stage right now. We're losing our edge. So many foreigners have come in, and so many workers, and they say, Singapore is losing their edge. You guys used to be so competitive. What happened? Are you guys always complaining and all that? But I'm not sure. I mean, honestly, I think the way we've been brought up and educated results in a way that we don't question people. We don't question policies. We just accept them and we say, okay, let's just accept this. Let's just carry out this policy and see where it heads to. So you can see so many instances of that in the past. For example, Stop at 2, as we were talking about earlier, about how the NS cohort has been decreasing year after year, and we only decided to do something about it later on. And there's so many, So, I mean, obviously, this public transport is just, I guess you could say the straw that broke the camel's back.
The camel's back is probably not broken yet.
Well, it's close to breaking.
But Farhan, I will partially agree with you. But I think that transportation you face every day. Yeah, you face the frustration in the morning, you face the frustration in the afternoon. And then suddenly you get announced this, Now, true, it's going to be a mosquito bite. That's it. But I say, come on, crowded, 3 trains, fully loaded train just passed me by this morning, right? So actually, I'm unhappy with the quality, I'm unhappy with the delay, I'm unhappy with
Right.
everything.
So you do agree about the unhappiness point that Farhan is bringing up, right? Now, what accounts for this unhappiness? Let's try and get down to it. Is it because there's a perception of a lack of accountability, lack of explanation, perception otherwise? There is the sense that the government is not being sufficiently transparent. The government is not being accountable. There's obviously an increased demand for accountability, right?
Whether government or public companies, I see the 2 private companies as because you operate public service.
Yeah, but I think it's a total system.
It's a total system, right? Non-transparency.
Yeah.
Right?
So
Non-transparency.
let's talk about that. How could the government or the PTOs in this case, could they have been more transparent in the way they went about this?
In my honest opinion, the Singapore government is actually quite transparent. All the information is available online. You can go to their different government websites and download all the data. The one mistake that they made, and this was a very, very fatal mistake, it was 5-6 years ago, they made the conscious decision not to engage the public on the internet, on social media. And when that happened, there was a vacuum. And this vacuum was obviously filled up by a lot of people, about a lot of anti-government rhetoric. And now they are trying to bring it back, trying to claw it back. They're going online. You can see all the publicity, PR blitz that's going on. You've seen, they even have a Twitter. The Singapore government even has a Twitter.
But it's all coming across as PR.
Exactly. That's the thing, because now people when they look at these efforts by the Singapore government, they think, they're just trying too hard. What are they trying to do? We already made up our minds that the Singapore government isn't doing the job.
Okay,
I think, look,
please.
Okay, I think it's ironic we're talking about transparency with regard to public transport, because I think the public transport fare mechanism is actually completely transparent. I mean, you have a formula out there. You can question the formula. You can say, why is it like this? But at least there's a formula, right? And there's a predictable schedule of fare reviews. I mean, what's not transparent is decisions taken in many other countries where they decide this year I'm going to have a fare review, next year I won't. I mean, we don't know why they do or don't. I mean, the point is, you can disagree with it. I think people should, in fact, investigate and ask questions about it, but I don't think you can fairly level the charge that it's not transparent.
Yeah.
It's transparent enough that you can exactly point at the formula and say, look, I don't like the formula, I don't like this part about it. You
But
see?
it's not that you don't like the formula. The formula doesn't make sense.
Right, but you can
You
make
see?
a criticism because
Correct.
you have
And
a formula.
Therefore,
you have a formula
transparency
to look at.
means providing the information for me to make sense. Not just say, look, it's there. Read it. It's information. Information is not enough. Is the information relevant? Does it answer the key question?
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
actually, Walter, you may disagree.
Okay.
You may disagree. But I think you also have to listen to the other point of view, right? And we have to be careful not to be overly dismissive.
Okay.
Yes.
So the first thing is there are technical means available for the transmission of information and knowledge. Yes?
Yes.
That's the point you're
Correct.
making.
Yes.
But technical means does not necessarily translate to transparency,
That's right.
right? You may have the means, but you may not use it in a manner that is transparent, that is
Yes.
sufficiently honest,
Yes.
Yes.
whether it's perceived or otherwise.
Yes.
Your point, Walter, is that this government is transparent sometimes to a fault, because it actually puts everything.
I wouldn't
on
say
the-
to a fault, but
Well,
I would say
well,
at least
yeah,
in the area
okay.
of public
Yeah,
transport.
I
there is-
added that.
yeah, I wouldn't say to a fault.
But you put all the cards on the table. This government is known for that, putting all the cards, whether it's population planning policy.
Some
or whatever.
areas,
It's to
but-
put all this on the board. Said we want to be judged by it. Okay, that's the plus side. Right. Then, Michael, your point is: are you taking on board the criticisms when you put these cards on the table? Now, there's a perception
That's a fair
that
point.
even though
Yes.
I'm putting the equation, I'm putting the formula on the table, and I'm asking for your views, I'm not paying enough attention to the views that are being communicated. Now, would you consider that sufficiently transparent?
I think that's a completely fair point. I mean, I think
Then why
you can
didn't you
put out-
acknowledge that earlier
What?
on? Michael was trying to
acknowledging
say
now,
that.
right?
Michael was trying to say that.
But on the issue of fairness, right? I think fairness is something for human beings to adhere to. I don't think that fairness is something that we necessarily should demand and expect from companies, right?
No, we talk about the
Yeah.
whole system.
But in the system as a whole, right? I think it's fair for the government to put out a review mechanism. It's fair for them to put out the formula. I think they give people a fair shot at criticizing it, but I don't think we can all expect that every single one of our criticisms gets adopted 100% by the government. So, I mean, I think your perception is that they might hear you speaking and they don't take any of your concerns on board at all. But, I mean, why do you think that's the case? I mean,
On the contrary,
point.
we know what is fairness. We may not be able to define it, but we know when it's not fair. You
Okay.
see? Right? Now, where is not fair? When you don't have to increase, you do it, and I have to suffer, or at least a few of us have to suffer. That's
Okay.
not fair. What's fair? You don't do it. Life goes on as normal.
Okay.
You are not worse off. I'm not worse off. That's fair.
Okay,
Huh?
I think
Okay,
I think that's a fair point, right? I mean, in the sense that what you're saying is, people may not always be able to quantify the point about fairness.
Okay.
It's notional, right? So let me take you to this. One of the recommendations by the Fair Review Mechanism Committee in 2013 was this: have a flexible mechanism, and I quote. The committee recommends having a rollover mechanism to allow the PTC some flexibility to vary the fare adjustment quantum granted at each fare review exercises, or to defer the exercise in a particular year to the next year. This is to allow the PTC to balance the safeguarding of commuter interests and the long-term viability of the PTOs. Now, what this means is that the PTC actually has the discretion
That's right.
to say, this year, because of a new development like the oil price plunge, we have chosen to defer the review.
But they have done that before. They have
Yeah,
deferred
but
fair
the question
reviews.
is, the question that Michael is asking is, why could that not have been done this year?
But Michael, when they reduced the allowable increase by half the previous year, wasn't that fair? I mean,
Yeah.
wasn't
that was
wasn't that
exceptional, and I took my head off because also they lost. There was a 40% drop in their profit. Okay.
Okay.
Right. But then when I went back into the annual report now, I say it dropped because you did not make provisions for replaceable operating assets. You're failing in strategic planning, but never mind, that is in the past, right? But it was good, right? You could have made it 6.6%, but you did only at
But your
2.8.
point is also earlier on you made was that the defining variable here, or the determining variable for your point is that there's been a 50% drop
Yes.
in a significant component, which is energy.
right?
Now you can't dismiss that.
Yeah.
That is not a that's not a marginal shift. It's a 50% drop,
Yeah.
which should call for a review of whether or not to have a review.
Yes.
No, I think the
Farhan.
problem here is that when we see a certain situation that fits us, then we decide, hey, wait a minute, why is this situation not reflected on our public transport fares? And we can't just change the goalpost and move it around. When the goalpost
Can't be
stays
too
there, it has
arbitrary.
to stay there. Exactly.
1 year ago, nobody thought, even I, nobody thought the oil price would drop below sub 100. Okay, I went up there to say that I expect oil price to hit 200, right?
Yeah.
Okay, me, right? But when it keep dropping to 50, right? Don't forget, the break even is actually $35, right? So the oil price is expected to just go on the floor about 40, right? Now it's at 50, right? And it will keep dropping, or you stay put at about 45 to 50, right? Now, when something like that happens, then everybody must sit down and say, hey, look, let's take a look. Situation have changed. The key parameters have changed, right? Now, look at the formula again, right? Have we factored in this? Can we actually say that for 1 or 2 years, no fare increase? What's going to be the downside, right? Can we then exercise restraint? I'm just asking for restraint. I'm not talking about the
So
macro
Michael,
thing, you know?
you're talking about the need to exercise restraint.
Yes.
And Farhan is saying, how do you actually, who exercises restraint, under what circumstances do you? It can't be too arbitrary. That's the point
Yes.
that,
Yeah.
Walter,
Right.
you agree as well.
Right.
So
Yes.
really, I think at the end of the day, it comes back to the larger point we're making, right? The government should not just be seen as providing the mechanism for communication and providing information upright. But also, I guess, the bigger issue here is there's a perception that the government is not listening enough. It's a perception more than anything else, perhaps, you know. But there is a perception, and the government should pay enough attention to that perception, which is not going to go away. Point.
If I may, the government is actually listening to these perceptions. We're moving away from a fully privatized public transport model to one that's subsidized.
Yes.
When I
Right.
say that, what I mean is
Yes.
that all the
contracting
assets,
model, yes.
correct, exactly, bus contracting. So all the assets, all future assets, buses, trains,
Right.
whatever, is now going to be purchased by the government,
Yes.
and they're going to lease it out to the different public transport
Right.
operators.
Social enterprise
Exactly.
model, right?
So, but your point, Farhan, is that came about as a result of the government listening to
Exactly.
the feedback that has been coming.
Yes, because Michael, if I may, he was suggesting that there was all this criticism being leveled at the public transport operators, but no one is listening. The fact of the matter is, they are listening. Now, whether we choose to listen to what they're saying is another matter altogether.
You see, when you then respond to their response, then we are not accepting. No, we are together in this, right? Combine, we think, we come out with a better solution. I think this year is the best year to reconfigure the whole arrangement. Should we continue to have 2 private operators that is expected to behave socially responsible, but they did not? Okay, maybe we should replace them. And that's a very radical thinking, because other social enterprises have worked.
Okay.
But Michael, I
Economist,
think the
yeah.
broader point is that we have been gradually moving towards a system where basically the government takes more and more of a role in paying for public transport, and this has been happening not just with bus contracting, although that's very important. It's been happening very gradually with revisions to the MRT system as well. And I think overall, the reason why all this is occurring is because it is obvious to everyone that a for-profit company, like you said, and I agree with you in this part, cannot be expected to simultaneously look after commuter interest and shareholder interest to the same degree.
So the
Yeah.
hybrid model gives rise to a lot of tension,
Right.
inherent tension, right?
No
Now,
need tension, Viswa, if I might say so. To increase fare when there's only 2, when you're not losing any money, is actually profiteering, the word that we don't want to use.
Sure.
It is profiteering.
Right.
Okay.
So I mean, and then it begs the question, is it wrong of commercial companies to make some profit? And then it goes back to your question, should they have been listed in the first place? I mean,
Exactly.
all these things are, but we are not here in 45 minutes or 50 minutes
Right.
to solve the problems of the entire system, right?
Yeah.
But I hope that some of these points raised, which are valid, you know, brings out the tension in the issue that we're dealing with. And the larger issue of dealing with the perception, a growing perception that the government is not listening closely enough and not responsive enough. That point is coming through. Now, there's also another variable here, which is giving rise to a lot of frustration, which is that the MRT system has been failing, has been so unprecedented levels. 24 times there have been stoppages and disruptions since June of 2013. 24 times is not something that you can just ignore. So all that is not helping. So people are saying you're putting the cart before the horse. Sort that out, give us really what we consider a world-class system, right? So the government also should maybe tone down a little bit on this slogan of world-class system. I mean, there are different versions of world-class system. The more the government is doing that, they're scoring their own goal.
Yes.
You know?
Exactly.
So maybe the government should tone down its rhetoric that it's a world-class system because you're raising expectations to a level that it can't really fulfill. Now, we have to wrap soon, so I'm going to ask each one of you to give one recommendation or a message that you want Minister Lui Tao Q to pay special attention to. One point. This is a very important opportunity I'm giving you. And he is listening.
Okay.
Okay.
Who shall we start from?
You.
He needs to hire a new PR agency. Definitely.
Are you volunteering?
No, I'm not. I'm not trained in PR, but I feel that they can do a better job in communicating this type of issues to the public, that's for sure. There's so many discontent and unrest, and you can't just tell people, hey, the information is out there, go and get it. Sometimes, you need to lead them. You need to lead the horse to the well. And is that feeding? Is that like, what do you call that? Feeding them? We've been brought up this way. Well, I wouldn't say we've been brought up this way, but Singaporeans are just this way. And then it comes back to the bigger picture of losing our competitiveness, but that's another issue for altogether. So hire a new PR agency and make sure your communications are all way better than what they're doing right now.
Maybe you didn't mean PR, but better communication.
Better communications.
Because PR has a different connotation to it.
Well, they need
It
to
wants to be
spin the
genuine.
story. When it boils down to it, they need to spin the story to make it more palatable to Singaporeans.
Is there anything specific that you think you could have done in that area of communication better?
For myself?
The Ministry of Transport.
The ministry. I feel the bus contracting model should have been better communicated. I feel that a lot of people still do not understand about this whole system. I think it's a fantastic system, and it's evidence that they're listening to the people. I'm not sure whether people know, but there's this new contract that's going up in Jurong East, package of bus services. There are actually 10 or 14 public transport companies actually coming in to bid for it. Not just SMRT and SBS, but there are also overseas players. The reason why this is great is because the LTA and the Ministry of Transport, they can actually see, hey, wait a minute, so is SMRT and SBS actually overcharging? Are they they're charging too much for the maintenance? And this will be a transparent way, as you mentioned, of seeing all these charges laid out on the table.
And all this is really, you're right, it's not being sufficiently communicated.
Exactly.
And in a timely fashion. Thank you.
Exactly.
Walter.
We should just help those who need the help the most, those commuters.
Is it not being done right now, you think?
I think right now, all of us, not just the ministry, probably members of the public as well, we think too much about how we are affected, and most of us are middle income, middle class. The truth is, as a middle income Singaporean, you are in fact enjoying a pretty decent public transport system. You're paying by world standards pretty low fares for doing so. You are going to be hurt a little in the pocketbook when fares go up, but the people hurt the most are actually lower income Singaporeans, obviously, who depend a lot on public transport to get to work. And we are helping them, but I think when we look at these fare changes in a broader perspective, we should be thinking more about, okay, let's do stuff to subsidize them, let's help them out, but let's not demand aid or assistance just because I'm paying, 1 or 2 cents more, but if I can easily afford to do so, well, why not help those who need the help most? You know, where a lot of us, I think, are a bit too self-centered when it comes to looking at the public transport system, to be honest.
So that message wasn't really for Minister Lutak?
No, I think it's for all of us
For all
in
of
general.
us. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. But is there a message for the minister? No. You skip that. Okay. Right. Michael.
Well, I'm not a public transport commuter, right? So I don't have a vested interest, and I'm not needy. I'm needy as a motorist, yeah, but not for public transport. Okay. But I would say that it's also difficult to accept the point that, hey, this is a first world system, because we don't have first world salaries, right? So we know that. But a message to minister is this: take the courage, revoke this fare increase, and spend this year creating public consultation. I'm very familiar with that because I work in a community, and discuss a reconfiguration of public transport system. Now you got a bus contracting model, yes. Social enterprise. You have the example of social enterprise in cooperative society, which is totally different, but they operate on the same private management principle. Why? First set by the late Dr. Goh Keng Swee, that you must make money. There must be no subsidy. Okay? So let's do it and say, yes, we hear you. We are going to revoke it because no one's going to suffer if we revoke it. Now let's start a series of private conversation and we come up with some recommendation. People like us, I don't mind coming out. I don't mind being proved wrong, but I like to be shown how. And I'm sure the other people, Singaporeans, is a remarkable people, right? People don't read. I mean, forget about the noisy ones. There are a lot of people who read and they say, yeah. And we can actually synergize our creativity and make for really first class, right? First class, what do I mean? Lower and lower flat fare. Wow, how is that possible? It is possible, right?
So it's very clear from our discussion alone and looking at the spectrum of views that have been coming through. For me, one thing that's very clear is that the government has to understand that there are different kinds of logic. The problem is sometimes people in authority believe that there's only your logic that exists.
Yes.
And when you take that stance, even though people are saying and you're providing the platform for communication, you're not actually listening because you're dismissing other people's point of view, and that cannot be hidden. And I think what we're seeing is a retaliation of being feeling dismissed or not being heard enough. Even though the government is doing a lot of things that appear to be right, there's a logic behind it. There has to be not just communication, but I think a shift in the perception that there is maybe not enough authenticity in the way it's being communicated.
Being human.
Being human. And sometimes that also means moving away from formulas as and when you have the power to exercise that discretion. Right.
The best ideas are not on the table.
Right. Thank you so much. And really, some of these are valid points, and I hope, Minister, you will be listening to them, and I hope that you take them on board. And these are expressed from the heart by Singaporeans. And we will be sending some of these points that you have raised to the government and to the Minister. Well, it leaves me now to thank my panelists, right? Michael,
Thanks.
Walter, Farhan, thank you so much. You've been a great panel.
It's a pleasure.
And I love it when you guys disagree. Who says Singaporeans are so agreeable? No, right? Well, remember, you ask, they answer, we make it happen. This has been IQ, Inconvenient Questions.